For a time, Elephane remained hidden, watching the people who were visible in the night dark streets of the little town. There were only a few, and as time passed, he noticed a perceptible lessening of the pressing soul darkness of the place. Cautiously, he reached out, probing here and there with his senses, seeking out first one human and then another, testing their emanations. Most of them were asleep, and in sleep their awareness of their loneliness diminished, and so the weight of darkness was less. He roved among the places where the people slept, sampling them, learning more about them. This close among them, he did not use the sinister. It was not needed. The resonances of the people around him pressed him from all sides, so many that it was difficult to sort them out. He had an impression that, in sleep, their minds created worlds unlike the world of reality. In some of those worlds, they were less alone, and in some more so, but much of the dream sense that came to him focused on aloneness. He probed here and there for deeper meaning, wanting to understand them. He probed, then withdrew abruptly, startled. Response resonance had met his. One of them had felt his probe and answered. He crouched in shadows and tried it again, warily. The person was asleep, but dreaming, had felt his resonance and reacted to it. The person seemed to welcome him. Carefully, avoiding the range of resonance that had brought response, he searched that one out. It was a cub, a child, and in its sleeping mind he had found empathy, not strong or developed, as in a cayenne, but it was empathy nonetheless. An animal came stiff-legged, ready to challenge him. With quick, high thrills he found its perceptive range and soothed it. It came to him and wagged its tail, and he marveled at it. Approximately the size of a wood nymph, the creature was mammal, quadruped, carnivorous, and of about the order of intelligence of a sprite. Its essence bore overtones of friendliness, royalty, and tenacity, and it wanted its ears scratched. It licked his hand and communicated acceptance in a broad range of harmonics, both above and below the apparent auditory ranges of the people with whom it cohabited. For a time, the animal followed him as he scouted the town, and he was pleased at the company. But then another smaller and slightly different creature crossed his path. Giving a yelp of delight, the quadruped left him to chase and threaten it, its resonance combining frolic in it and inherent ferocity. Wheeled things, metal-cased, stood here and there, vehicles like the 18-wheeler on which he had ridden, but smaller, a variety of sizes and shapes. One of them, resting at the side of a dark street, he investigated. He studied it from all sides, above and below, then deciphered its door and studied it from inside. Much of what he found had obvious function, but he had no clue as to how or why it worked. He was driven from it when another vehicle rounded a corner, almost catching him in its headlights. The two creatures inside this one were male, alert and suspicious. Their essence radiated darkly. He walked a well-lit street where most of the structures had large sheets of clear crystal emplaced in their faces, and stopped at one that had garments displayed inside. If he were going to walk among these people, he decided, he should be garbed like them. It would be best not to be noticed. The structure had a portal with a metal lock. He stood before it, resonating up and down the electric-magnetic spectrum, close focusing his song upon the locking device until its bolt clicked back and he could open it. Once inside, he explored the enclosure and its contents, fingering fabrics, tasting their contents, awed at the variety of weave and textures achieved by people who lacked the harmonics even to draw flosses from the vapors or to grow crystal devices pitched to their own resonance. Sensing their limitations, he was puzzled by the magics they achieved despite them. I have much to learn of these people, he told himself. Various artificial replicas of the forms of males of their breed stood here and there, fitted out in garments. By studying these, he learned the uses of various garments, then outfitted himself with one full set of clothing and put it on. It was terribly uncomfortable, stiff and constraining, but a reflecting crystal on a wall assured him that in these garments he might pass relatively unnoticed among the creatures of this world. Through the front crystal pane, he spotted the same moving vehicle he had seen before. It stopped in the street before the building, and its occupants emerged, resonating, intent. He stood in shadows among racks hung with garments and studied the beings. There was distinct menace about them. Staying 2 strides apart, hands hovering at dark objects on their hips. They approached the enclosure. One shined a light through the crystal, flicking about the interior, while the other tested the portal and opened it. Then they were both inside with him, and their darkness pressed painfully upon him. At a table near the door, Elephane found a stack of fabric containers with strap handles. He took one to carry his cayenne garbin. Methodically, the 2 men moved through the enclosure, pointing their lights and searching. When they had both moved away from the portal, he stepped out and closed it behind him, resonating its lock back into positive mode. Their vehicle stood in the street, alive, singing a mindless harmony of machine sounds, and he was tempted to explore it, but he did not have time. Some distance away, the creature with the wagging tail found him again and padded along at his heels, panting happily. Its companion of a time ago, the animal let him know, had climbed a tree and refused to come down and play. Singing to it as he walked, holding the harmonics to the animal's auditory range, he learned several combinations of sounds in the human vocal range to which it responded readily, and he puzzled over those, wondering what they meant. Most of them had no real meaning to the creature. They were only codes to which it responded by rote. They included damn dog, scat, attaboy, and get off the couch. But there was one combination that had great meaning to the animal. He voiced it, testing, and the creature's joy was absolute. Its name was Hobo. For a long time it stayed with him, helping him to explore, showing him alleys and hide holes, trash bins and safe paths through vacant lots, and warning off others of its kind who offered to join them. Hobo left him, finally, when the moon was high and the town was very still. The creature emanated apology, but there was a place where it was supposed to be now, and its duty was clear. It invited him to come with it, and promised him comfort and security, a soft place to sleep, and food in a dish, and creatures who undoubtedly would scratch his ears and adopt him. Then, sad at his refusal, the animal turned away and headed for home. Elephane felt the weight of loneliness upon him all the more for its departure. On the roof of a tall building, above the worst of the horizontal residences of the street, Elephane sat and watched the sky lighten in the east, and wondered whither the Faya might have been right. Could Netea have leaped? Even at Nedakeda, where anyone would welcome and absorb a cast spirit, the leaping was extremely rare, a feat achieved only by the most brilliant of Epes, under the best of conditions in a receptive world. Was it possible that Natea had somehow achieved it? Here, on this soul-dark world, where blindness reigned and the harmonies were songs of mourning, could she have found even one soul to shelter her precious tiny spirit in its final, faltering moment? Natea. Softly, he sang the name, a voice in its full harmonic range, and the dull atmospheres of a sad world shimmered momentarily, quickened by the beauty of it. He slept then, the brief, healing rest of the Kai, and awoke to a bright morning dulled and haunted by the intense dark resonance of thousands of people no longer asleep. The intensity of their darkness stunned him, and he damped his senses to tight small ranges, shutting out as much as he could. How could they survive, he wondered. How could such a race have come to be, that had such fullness of the mind and such blindness of the senses? How could they exist, each locked forever within itself, alone and longing, yet incapable of rapport? What sort of insane world would produce such a race? Still, he reminded himself, it was the same world that had, so long ago, produced the Kai. This very same planet had once gloried in the singing radiance of harmonic rhapsody and brought forth a people who could sing with it. There was now where the old Kaiden's people had no song, and yet within the dark emanations of them there was something that called to him. Beneath the pall of distress that beat at him, the intense, agonizing loneliness that punished his senses and made him mourn for them, he found there was much more. Even in the appalling darkness, there were creatures of keen intelligence, vigorous minds always seeking the unknown, searching for ways around their blindness. They were a strong race, strong in ways strange to the Cayenne. They could be violent, he sensed. They could be hostile and deadly if aroused. He had sensed that from the pair of males who searched for him in the place of garments. And still beyond it all, he found in the resonances a capacity for love. Perched on his rooftop unnoticed, Alipane studied the waking town below and found himself suddenly to be deeply attracted to these odd creatures. It was an attraction that shook him, seemed to come from elemental realms of himself that he had never explored. I have, he told himself, a great deal to learn. Cautiously then, he loosened the clamps on his wine-raging senses, stilling himself against the pain of perception of massed, myriaded loneliness. With large orbed eyes that saw ranges of spectrum beyond human sight, he watched the creatures passing below and marveled at them. Tapped ears attuned frequencies both lower and higher than human hearing, he listened to their voices, the pulsing of their hearts, the workings of their body, and the subtle overtones of their vocal projection, some of which influenced them, though they could not hear them, and with a vast, aching, parsing sense, spanning the ranges of harmonics between sight and sound, those ranges in which they emanated all their hopes and griefs, their response to beauty, and their terrible blind longings. He scanned them and experienced a grief greater than theirs. Few among them had any receptivity at all in those ranges, and those who did were only vaguely aware. So in those ranges that spoke of longings and sought understanding, the resonances that were the stuff of empathy, they cried out in their blindness and never knew that they called. Alipane knew, and their mute torment wrenched at his throat and brought tears to his eyes. It would be worse, he knew, when he went among them, when he touched them. Then he would have to deal with the infrasonics and would know the full power of their darkness. He stilled himself and concentrated on his task, pushing to its limits the steadfast will that made him leader of the Court. He must accustom himself to association with the tragic people of this world. He must transcend the darkness and learn to tolerate it. He must go among them and learn their ways. Only by knowing them could he know the limits of their tolerance, and only then could he unleash the power of the sinister and go in search of the spirit of Natea. He had to believe the impossible, that she had found her receptive sentient and made her leap. He must believe it. He must cling to that belief, because without it there was nothing. Without Natea the Cord was doomed, and without the Cord Kaidam was doomed. And the realization haunted him. Without Natea he wasn't sure whether he cared. He put the thought away and concentrated on believing. In the bright sky above him a bird dipped low and chirped its song, crystal drops of resonance heralding the morning. On impulse he spoke to it, trilling a quick code of tones in its range. Hearing it absorbed them into its own song. Possibly, as with the feathered creatures of Nandaketa, it might pass the code along to others, a hint of Kayan song and bird call that might reach the Faya and the others and let them know that he was well. In the distance, he heard the bird trill again, its song imbued with hints of Kayan song, and he heard another bird mimic the sparkling tiny tones of it. It wasn't just the people here who sang darkness, he realized. The world itself, the very essence of it, was their resonance. The people on the planet were in concert, and their essences fed back and forth, reinforcing the strange dark harmonies of the living mantle. What would happen, he wondered, if the music of Kaidam could somehow be reintroduced here? If these tight, angry harmonics could be rewoven, expanded, overlaid with the rich singing resonance of Kaidam? How could there be darkness among infinite glories? But it was a thought without substance. Such a thing could never be possible. Kaidam had once, on Nandaketa, imbued a world with this essence, but that had taken millennia to accomplish. And there they had started with a silent, unresonated orb, to introduce resonant lyric into the very mantle of a world that already had its own harmonic weave. Such a thing was beyond possibility. An entire resonant world, no lore of Kaidam, not even the mighty power of the sinister at its broadest range could ever ride more than the smallest fraction of it. Haunted by longing, battered by darkness, Elephane Feyrost concentrated on the people passing below, learning them, preparing himself to go among them.